This is Professor Homa. Welcome to part 6 of our web design workflow. And this last part will go over the floats so that we can actually put columns side by side. Our nav column that we see right here will be floated left of our section, and our section will be floated left of our aside, and our aside will be floated right. And then at the end, this footer will clear the float so that it goes back to normal after that. And we'll do a little formatting for our text that's in here right now. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my code. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to check my widths. Now I had a couple things that were messed up a little bit. I fixed this. Our section is now 358 because we subtracted the padding on the right and left, so that should be okay. And the width of my nav should be 186. I think I had 190 on the last one, but I went through and I checked everything. This is some stuff at the end that we're gonna throw in, and actually maybe I'll just cut this right now. And what we're going to do first is we're going to go to our nav and we're going to add in a property called float. And I'm going to do float colon left semicolon. And what this should do, if I go to design, is this will float our nav to the left of our section. There's our section right now. And you can see our section's not quite right yet, but we do have this float on the left side. So that's what we're going to do first. And that's called float left. And then what we're going to do with our section area, I'm gonna hit return here, and I'm going to do a float left because it's going to float left of a side. So I'm going to do a float, and that's also going to be a float left and a semicolon, and I'll see what that looks like so far. And that actually put it the right way. Okay, and we should also put a float right on this, even though it's working out right now. I'm still going to put a float right on my aside. Oh, and there it is. That's why it's working out. If it wasn't there, let's just take that off. Okay, that's what it would look like. It's not floating to the right of that, so I'm going to go in to a side and put a float right. And there's a semicolon. So that's what we have right now. So for our three sections that are our three columns that I'm looking at right now, our nav, our section, our aside, what I should have is nav is float left, section is float left, because it should always float to the position of what's after it in the HTML code. And because nav comes first, then section, then aside, or at least that's the way I wrote it, I'm going to float nav to the left of section, section to the left of aside, and aside I'm going to float right. So it makes sure that it goes right of everything else. And then after I'm done with that, I should put on my footer, and I'm going to hit a return here on my footer. I'm going to do something called clear both. Okay, and that should finish it off, at least with our floats, as long as all our widths are okay. So it should kind of look like that. Now I'm going to take something out of there because I did something ahead of time and then my recording got messed up. So I'm going to go into my header, or actually my address, and I'm going to get rid of this stuff here. Or I'm actually going to, I'll get rid of it for now. Okay, so for going back to my design, you see how we have this green stripe here? There's nothing in it. We're going to need to put that little tractor image in there, and what it's going to be is a background image of this section of that div, which is address. So to do that, I'm going to go back into my code, and this is for address, and what we're going to put in there is a background image. And you could just start typing and look for image, and when you get a little browse that pops up, you can double click on it and go find that tractor address image. Now when it puts that in, it puts it in as URL, and in parentheses it puts images / and then the name of the file. So it doesn't use quotes like it normally would. It just does URL and then there's parentheses. Make sure you put your semicolon. Okay, now when I first do that, if I look at it, it'll repeat it. It'll tile it in that section, which is not what I want. So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to basically put on a no repeat. So I'm going to do background, and I'll type background, and then where it says repeat, I'll double click on it, and I'll just put no repeat. And there's a semicolon, and I'll check it out again, and right now it's kind of to the left side by default. So to move it to the right, I do one more declaration, and I'll start typing background, and it's background position, and I'll choose right, semicolon, and I'll check it out, and that's the way it should look. So it basically puts a background image in that div, and that's that little piece that we had saved from our Photoshop page. If I go look at it, it's this little piece here. That's the one we saved as a separate image. And also, if we had text that kept going, it would actually go over top of that image if necessary. So it would not get covered. Text would not be covered up by that. We can also do the same thing if you put it like a very light tinted photo behind here. We could do that as well. So that's pretty much our floats. There's our 3 floats. We're ending our float. The only last thing we're going to do here, and I'm just gonna paste this in here just to save some time, right after section, because these are both elements that are kind of based on section. So I'm gonna, okay, what I put in here were 2 declarations. I didn't put anything in it yet, but it's called a section H1 and a section P. And what we can do is, because there's an H1 that is this welcome part, and because these 2 paragraphs are identified as P tags, we can actually format them based on that. And the reason we're putting section ahead of it is in case we have a P somewhere else, or in case we have an H1 somewhere else, this identifies to that particular section. So for the H1 in this section, we could say, just for example, that we're going to use, I'll go over here and just type in font family. I have that right, font family. And I'll choose Georgia, and maybe I'll even put Cambria as the first one. Cambria, Georgia, and a semicolon at the end. That way, that when I do that, I'll click off of this. I'll go back to design. You can see what it did. I'll go back to split. What it did is it put that in Cambria now. So it's still an H1, it's still bold, it's still the same size, but it now would put it in Cambria. If you wanted to do a color, and I'm going to hit a return here, and I'm just going to do color, and I'll do colon, and then if I hit my pound sign, I could actually sample a color from over here. So if I actually wanted to sample a color from one of the buttons, I can do that. And if I go back to there, now it's taking that brown color, and that's for the H1 tag. And I could, anything that overrides default, I could throw in here. I don't have to make it bold because an H1 already is bold. So I can do that for my H1 tag. For my P tag, I'm just going to put in here a padding bottom, and that'll almost act like a space after that you might see in Word or a page layout program. I'll just put padding bottom, and I'll just put like 12 pixels. It'll be almost like a space after each P tag. So if I go back into split, and I'll go into design first, you can see what that does. It puts that little spacing afterwards. And I'm even going to increase my line height a little bit. Line height we did in there to center it, but line height can also be used as leading, line spacing. That's what it's really for. So I'm also going to throw in a line height. And I'm going to use like a 1.5 EM. And that's almost like using 150%. EM basically means the default point size that you're using. So if it's 12 pixels, then whatever the line height will be, or if it's 16 pixels, whatever the line height will be, it'll be 1.5 times the line height. So whatever 16, if the default pixel size of the font is 16, it's going to be 1.5 times whatever that is. So it'll be, I guess, it'll be 24. I guess 1.5 would be 24. So I'll take a look at that in design, and you can see that spreads it out a little bit. It spreads it out. It's a little easier to read, especially if you don't have a lot of text on your home page. You could spread it out a little bit. It looks a little nicer, and we still have our text after. So we could add as many other, formatting properties as we want to that. But for now, I think we're pretty good. And notice I just put them right after section. Sometimes people put them all the text formatting things at the beginning. I like to put them right after. So where I have section, if there's any other more detailed section formatting things like H1 or P or anything else that may be in that section, I'll put them after as well. And I have my aside down at the bottom. And now that I'm done, I originally copied my footer and I put it after address because it was the same. But now that I'm done with that, I'm going to put it at the bottom in case anybody else would look at it or need to follow my code a little better. I'm going to put footer at the bottom because that's where it is in HTML code, and that's probably a better place to have that. And I'll just go and sometimes I'll just clean up my spacing a little bit, get rid of any extra spacing at the end. But my CSS looks pretty good. I'll do a Command S and save my CSS file. I'll look at there's my source code. Everything looks okay there. I'll do a Command S and make sure that's saved. I'll look at it in design, and I should also do a preview in browser, whatever browser you want to look at it in. Here it is in, I'll make sure this is in Safari. You could check it out in Google Chrome, in Firefox. If you're on Windows, check it out in Internet Explorer. So this is what it looks like now. Now, we didn't put our links in or anything like that, but at least we have our layout done. If there's any issues with columns getting longer, we'll deal with that later. But for now, that was our web design workflow, and that's part 6 of that.